Señor Presidente.
President, Secretary General, I dedicate these first words to reiterate Cuba's solidarity and support to the brotherly people of Palestine, victim of more than 75 years of colonial occupation, flagrant violations to their legitimate rights as a nation, submitted to cruelty, aggression, collective punishment, and apartheid. Over the last 11 months, the Israeli army has massacred more than 40,000 civilians. In that indiscriminate and disproportionate massacre, this has killed more boys and girls than men and women. They die with the complicity and weapons contributed by the government of the United States, with the complicit silence of others. We pay tribute to the more than 220 aid workers of this organization who have also been killed. Cuba's position is clear and unequivocal. President Miguel Díaz-Canel Bermúdez has said, and I quote, "History will not forgive the indifferent, and we will not be among them." The genocide against the Palestinian people must end unconditionally and without further delay. Israel, with the complicity of the United States, has brought the world to the brink of a major world conflict. The irresponsible aggression against Lebanon, Syria, Iran, and the people of the Middle East will have consequences that are hard to predict. Your Excellencies, 79 years after the establishment of this organization, the continued violations of the United Nations Charter and international law, aggressions, interference in the internal affairs of states, and the imposition of unilateral coercive measures for political purposes have become facts of life. Aggressive, expansionist, and supremacist military doctrines of domination are undermining international peace and security to an alarming extent. The risk of a nuclear catastrophe is real and imminent. For the 9th consecutive year, world military expenditure has continued to increase. In 2023, it reached the record figure of $2.44 trillion. That is to say, millions of dollars. This includes the development of new nuclear weapons. There has been a regression in spite of the huge efforts made by states parties and signatories of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons and enlightened and broad sectors of international society. Nor will there be peace without development. Developed countries, which inhabit the very same planet, blindly refuse to invest even minimally in its own prosperity and security. They fail to comply with their always insufficient promises on official assistance for development. The selfish figure boastfully promised in 2023 and quickly forgotten represents less than 0.37% of their national incomes. The aspiration of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals has vanished. According to Forbes, just in the last 4 years alone, the collective wealth of the 5 richest people in the world has grown, while 5 billion people continue to live in poverty. The 1% richest in the world accumulate almost twice as much wealth as the rest of the global population. We're talking about 5 billionaires who, in this period, saw their wealth increase by some 423 billion euros, while the global population has got poorer. According to Oxfam, the richest 1% have accumulated almost double as much wealth as the rest of the world population. With a tax on the wealth of billionaires, 2 billion people could be brought out of poverty. We are talking about structural crises, which are determined by the imperialist system and the international order imposed on us. None of these problems will be solved by undermining the intergovernmental nature of the United Nations, as some aim to, or by weakening its essential role in the promotion of sustainable development for all. Climate change is advancing inexorably. Climate change is an unquestionable fact. In July 2024, scientists announced that the planet had endured 13 straight months of record-high temperatures. If the irrational and unsustainable production and consumption patterns of capitalism are not changed in an urgent and significant way, it will be impossible to limit the global average temperature increase by 1.5 degrees Celsius in comparison with pre-industrial levels. Responsibilities should be shared by all, but not all should bear the same responsibilities, nor is it fair for this to be so. However, a step in the correct direction could be taken at the COP29, which will be held in Azerbaijan, and we could adopt a new collective financing goal. The countries of the North will have a new possibility to begin closing the climate finance gap and pay their financing debts. We, the countries of the South, will have to design a sufficient goal that responds to our own needs with guarantees for development and social justice, despite the huge obstacles and challenges that we face. The solution will have inevitably to include writing off foreign debt, which has already been paid several times over. A fair democratic international order ensuring peace and balance in the world. The exercise of the right to development by all states on an equal footing based on sovereign equality, strengthening the participation and representation of developing countries in decision-making and policy-making processes in the world. An order that guarantees the general good and prosperity of all peoples in harmony with nature and the sustainable management of natural resources, to ensure the exercise of all human rights for all people. We need a new civilized coexistence among nations in which solidarity, international cooperation, integration and the peaceful settlement of disputes prevail. This has to be an alternative to the philosophy of dispossession, war, the use or threat of use of force, aggression, occupation, domination, and the cultural, political, financial, technological, and military hegemony, or any other manifestation threatening the peace, independence, and sovereignty of states. An international order without unilateral blockades or sanctions, based on multilateralism, fully abiding by the United Nations Charter and international law. Madam President, the government of the United States has clearly continued to engage in the pernicious and unrealizable attempt to determine and control Cuba's destiny. It is an old ambition, anchored in the Monroe Doctrine, which defines the imperialist and hegemonic nature of the United States policy towards Cuba and the region of our America. The economic, commercial, and financial embargo is also a political, technological, and communication blockade. It has been conceived as one of its main weapons of aggression to destroy the Cuban economy. It aims to seek to cut off the country's financial revenues, to bring about the collapse of the economy, and to create a situation of political and social instability. The damage it causes is visible and undeniable. It has an impact on the daily life of all Cubans. It is accompanied by the most ferocious disinformation and slanderous campaign, perennial attempts to interfere in our internal affairs, and the complicit tolerance of groups which, from U.S. territory, perpetrate violent and terrorist acts against Cuba. These actions violate international law. They run counter to the purposes and principles of this organization and numerous resolutions adopted by this General Assembly. The siege so conceived has been reinforced with Cuba's inclusion in the U.S. State Department's arbitrary, shameful list of countries that allegedly sponsor terrorism. It is a fraudulent designation, void of any international authority or mandate. However, by virtue of this, reprisals of an extraterritorial character, exceeding the sovereign jurisdiction of the United States, are taken against Cuba and are manifested in and against any country. In May of this year, the U.S. State Department itself recognized that Cuba was fully cooperative with the United States with the international anti-terror efforts. This mere recognition of a universally established truth has not led to a relaxation of the unilateral coercive measures, but it does make the presence of Cuba on that illegitimate list to be ever more consistent, confusing, and unjustifiable. Soon, there will be new presidential elections in the United States. This is a matter that only is up to the United States citizens. It's only incumbent on the U.S. people, despite the nefarious and historical habit of the government of the United States to interfere in the elections, and internal affairs of almost all member states of the United Nations, even its allies. History has taught us that no matter the results of these elections, the anti-Cuban sectors and politicians who have turned the attacks against Cuba into a profitable business will continue to be vocal and influential. They are the ones who have learnt to manipulate the US political system to pursue a particularly narrow and hostile agenda, which is the interest of a well-defined elite sector. They do not in any way represent the will of the majority of the people of the United States, nor that of the Cubans who live here. Whatever the results of these elections, Cuba will continue to defend its sovereign right to independence and to build socialism the way we Cubans decide, without any foreign interference. We will also continue to advocate for a respectful and constructive relations with the United States. Madam President, in 2014, the community of Latin American and Caribbean states gathered in Havana decided to proclaim our region as a zone of peace. That historic commitment is becoming increasingly relevant every day. We defend peace and multilateralism against the unilateral coercive measures that seriously damage Syria, Belarus, Nicaragua, Venezuela, Zimbabwe, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, Iran, Russia, Cuba, and several other nations. We strongly reject any attempt to undermine the legitimate constitutional order of our countries through putschist methods. It has already happened in Bolivia in 2019 and on the 26th of June, and there are attempts to do the same again in Honduras. We denounce the attempts to generate violence and destabilization in Venezuela. We reiterate our full support and solidarity with the Bolivarian and Chavista government headed by President Nicolas Maduro Moros and the civic and military unity of the Venezuelan people. The calls made not to recognize the electoral results are irresponsible and disrespectful to the people's will and their legitimate institutions. The destabilizing actions taken against the National Unity and Reconciliation government of Nicaragua must also cease. The brotherly people of Sandino will continue to count on our full support. We reiterate our support to Puerto Rico's legitimate right to self-determination and independence. The international community has a historic debt to Haiti. Haiti carried out the first independence revolution against slavery in this continent. We welcome the efforts made by the Caribbean community to find a sustainable solution to the tragic situation in Haiti, with respect for the independence and sovereignty of that sister nation. We support Argentina's legitimate right to sovereignty over the Malvinas, South Georgia and South Sandwich Islands and the surrounding maritime areas. We reaffirm our support and commitment to the peace efforts in Colombia, which Cuba will continue to contribute to in every possible way from its position as guarantor. Africa, the cradle of humanity, will always be able to rely on Cuba's support in its efforts to move towards the goal of development. We reaffirm our unwavering solidarity with the Sahrawi people and their self-determination. Cuba strongly rejects the measures aimed at harming the territorial integrity and sovereignty of the People's Republic of China. We condemn the interference in its internal affairs, and we reiterate our unswerving support to the One China principle, as was decided by this General Assembly in its historic resolution 2758, which recognized the People's Republic as the one and legitimate representative of the Chinese people. We are in favor of a serious, constructive and realistic diplomatic solution by peaceful means to the current war in Ukraine. And this must be in line with international law, guaranteeing the security and sovereignty of all. In this context, Cuba supports the joint proposal presented by Brazil and China to find a political solution to that crisis. Madam President, distinguished delegates, let us join together our efforts to achieve effective multilateral institutions which are able to respond to the interests of the people, of the humble, the poor, the needy, and the exploited. They are the overwhelming majority, based on just equality, the exercise of human rights by all human beings, and respect for the sovereign rights of every nation. Thank you very much.
I thank the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Cuba,